Is test taker perception of assessment related to construct validity? Test taker perception of assessment demand refers to the skills that test takers perceive as necessary for answering test questions. This self-reported perception can provide a useful source for test validation. Specifically, there may be a gap between test takers' perceptions and the intentions of test developers. Examining this gap can help identify potential flaws in the measurement instrument, such as construct underrepresentation or irrelevant difficulties. It can also offer evidence to support the measurement's validity. From this validation perspective, test takers' perception of assessment demand relates to the concept of face validity, the perceived suitability of a test's content for its intended purpose. However, the literature on validity tends to trivialize face validity and denies the relationship between face validity and construct validity. In a previous qualitative study, Dr. Xie found that test takers perceived a wider range of necessary skills, including test-taking skills, than the language skills intended by test developers. Inspired by this finding and the above research gap, Dr. Xie conducted a large-scale quantitative study to examine test takers' perceptions of assessment demand and its impact on the measurement of intended constructs. A differential item function model was adopted. Two queries were addressed in this study. Why test-taking skills are perceived by test takers as necessary? Are their perceptions influenced by test features, or by their personal characteristics? How do the perceived test-taking skills affect the measurement of the intended construct? More than 800 test takers from a university in southern China, who had registered for the college English test band for a high-stakes English language assessment, participated in this research. Data were collected via two major scales and two parallel forms of set4. The perception of assessment demand scale consists of 47 items and 4 subscales. Each subscale contains items referring to language skills and to test-taking skills. The goal orientation scale includes 10 items referring to various test uses reported by the test takers. Two parallel forms of the set4 papers were used to assess test performance at the beginning and near the end of this study. To address the first query, the researcher conducted item-level exploratory factor analysis, confirmatory factor analysis and path analysis. The diff model was applied to investigate the differential effects of perception variables on the construct validity of set4. Regarding the first query, this study found that test takers perceived language skills and test-taking skills as equally necessary. Regardless of the test developer's intentions, when test takers perceived language skills as necessary for test taking, they also considered test-taking skills as necessary. In terms of the influence of personal characteristics on the perception of assessment demand, this study found that instrumentally oriented test takers and test takers who performed better on the pre-test tended to score higher on the perception factor, meaning that they regarded more skills as necessary for test taking. Interestingly, the study's findings challenged the assumption about instrumentally oriented test takers. While it was expected that they would prioritize test-taking skills over language skills, the study was unable to identify a qualitative difference between the perceived language skills and test-taking skills for this group. This result suggested that instrumental-oriented test takers saw as many intended language skills as unintended test-taking skills. The finding for more able test takers was also against the intuitive assumption that more able test takers should be more confident and see less assessment demand. It suggested that the perception of assessment demand referred to test takers' awareness or knowledge of the skills necessary for test taking rather than their confidence toward the test. Regarding the differential effects of perception variables on the construct validity of set4, this study found that test takers' perception of assessment demand was related to the measurement of the intended constructs. Specifically, perception of linguistic knowledge negatively affected performance on the reading test, while perceptions of test-taking skills positively affected performance on the reading test and the essay test. Researcher interpreted that the correct perception might have discouraged test preparation because linguistic knowledge was considered difficult to improve during a short period, while general test-taking skills were considered easy to improve. To conclude, this study examined test takers' perception of assessment demand and its impact on measuring intended constructs. Further studies are necessary to deepen our understanding of test takers' perception of assessment from the measurement and assessment field.